and which can be removed from the outside. Should a small child get in there and lock the door and not be able to understand how to unlock it, or God forbid there's an adult in there passed out with a medical emergency, you can access the inside of that shelter just by simply removing those air vent deflector covers.
Well, that's fabulous. So you're saying that this is not only a very strong safe room, this is almost like a vault.
Actually, we use ours as a vault all the time. When we go out of town, we lock up our musical instruments, lock up our guns, and there is a way to actually not be able to open those air vent deflector covers, which I explain privately to our customers. It's very, very simple. It takes about 5 minutes.
Fabulous. So now we have a safe room, we have a vault, and all in your garage.
And a panic room.
And let's talk about the panic room.
Well, that's another thing I like, too, because, sometimes I'm out traveling around, and if my wife's home alone at night, if she thinks somebody's out snooping around the house and she gets scared, all she has to do is go in the garage, get in the safe room, bolt the door shut with those 3 1-inch solid steel bolts, get on her cell phone, call the police, and she's safe.
Another factor with those panic rooms and safe rooms is obviously storms, but what about a fire? How would that affect those?
Well, these are not fireproof. We've thought about for years ways to make a fireproof tornado shelter, safe room. We actually have the technology to do the fireproofing, but the problem is the air ventilation system. You still have to have air ventilation. However, I can tell you this much, that safe room is going to certainly offer some protection from fire, but it's going to offer tremendous protection from water damage caused by the firemen putting the fire out.
Isn't that half of the problem with the fire?
That's half the problem with the fire. So we keep all of our family photos locked up in there in plastic tubs. We keep our important documents locked up in there and all the time. It doesn't take up that much room.
So, Jeff, when you talk about your best or your the shelter size that most people choose, did you say 4 by 6?
That's our most popular size. That's correct.
How many people would that typically hold comfortably, and how long would you think would need to be in there?
Well, those are 2 great questions. The first question, if we use FEMA's guidelines of 4 square feet per person for family members, then that would be about 6 people. But of course the thing that they don't consider is the size of people, whether it's large adults or small children. So, that can vary a little bit. I can tell you this much, that one of our shelters was in the Oklahoma City tornado in '99, a 6 by 8, which is rated for 10 to 12, and they got 27 people crammed in there. So you can get a lot of people in there.
Well, sure. The more worried you are, the more friendly you are.
That's right.
Jeff, what about these mobile home parks? I know when I was in the legislature, there was a discussion about having legislation that would mandate that these mobile home parks have large storm shelters. Obviously, if you had one where 100 people lived, obviously you have to have a pretty large storm shelter. Have you installed any at mobile home parks?
We've installed a few at some smaller mobile home parks. However, we now have a new jumbo concrete shelter, which is will hold 40 people. It's 10 foot by 20 foot. It weighs 77,000 pounds. It's all above ground concrete. So this is available now for mobile home parks.
Great.
Okay, so we've talked about some steel safe rooms, panic rooms, vaults, and we've talked about some outside concrete. Now, I noticed that some people just set their concrete outside shelter at ground level, and some people put them in the ground. Can you talk about that and tell us what do you think would be the way to go?
Well, we have an outdoor above-ground concrete safe room, which it weighs 11,000 pounds, but to meet the engineering requirements, we still need another 2 cubic yards of concrete, or in other words, about 8,000 pounds for it to anchor down to. So it gives it a total weight of about 19,000 pounds. And that weight versus the size will go ahead and withstand an EF5 tornado very well. But your advantage, one of the reasons I like these outdoor concrete shelters is because, let's face it, steel and paint sitting outside in the elements, we all know what happens to cars as time goes by. Well, the same thing's going to happen to steel and paint. So anytime we set either a steel or a concrete shelter outside, I always recommend people buy some inexpensive 2x4 framing, maybe even a little insulation if they want to, and frame around it, and maybe put some siding on it to match their house. So that way they can kind of look like a shed.
Have you ever had two neighbors that have gone in on the cost of one of these and shared it and said, you know what, we all get along so well, why don't we just buy one together and split the cost? Does that ever happen?
Yeah, actually it has.
Okay.
It sure
and,
has.
and do they buy a slightly larger one so everybody can go in there?
Yeah. Yep.
How do you feel? Does that make sense to you?
I think it makes great sense. I'm still waiting for someone to come up with some kind of a timeshare program.
Well, there is a guy that has some missile silos that he's got a timeshare on portions of that. Well, Jeff, you talked about some safety features. Now, Joplin, Mark and I were there, and we saw the devastation. And Mark, I really didn't see anybody who had a storm shelter. That there were a few basements, but I didn't see any bolted to any concrete. Frankly, I didn't see any storm shelters.
No, I didn't see any either. Most of the people that we saw that survived were in basements, or they went to steel structures outdoors, and whether they be a shop or a garage or whatever. But you're right. I don't remember seeing too many storm shelters down there.
And I feel very confident. I mean, that one man that we saw who was standing outside what used to be his garage, and his garage was swept clean. It was gone. Had he had a steel storm shelter, safe room there, bolted down, it would still be there. I'm confident.
That's true. I don't think I saw any concrete foundations gone. So I think you're right. I think if they would have had bolted down storm shelters, they would have been fine.
So here's my question, and this is for Jeff Olsen. With the devastation in Joplin and FEMA's funding, how is that going to impact deliveries of storm shelters?
Well, we know FEMA is going to come out with an incentive program. Maybe incentive is not quite the right word for it, but it's kind of like a grant program, which I believe they've just now implemented it in Alabama and the other areas down south where those 350 people perished here a few months ago from all the tornadoes. There's a program currently implemented in Texas using FEMA funds as well as Mississippi. And what FEMA will do is going to pay a percentage of the cost of buying a storm shelter. They're going to have certain requirements for the construction and design of that storm shelter. Obviously, they're not going to allow somebody to go out and get some concrete and a steel door from a local hardware store and build themselves something that's homemade and then qualify. But the delay right now is a little longer right now in getting a shelter than we'd like to see. But then again, no one in our industry was prepared for these two major disasters. But based on the experience from the Oklahoma City tornado in '99 and other areas, the delay once the FEMA money is going to be announced and released will probably be in the 9 to 12 month area.
So are you saying that 9 to 12 months?
That's right.
It took a couple seconds to sink in. So if I want a storm shelter, the longer I wait, the longer I'm going to wait?
The longer you wait, the longer you're going to wait. That's correct.
Wow.
So you want to get your orders in now. I think that's something to think about. And we need to talk about that when we get back after this break. This is USA Prepares, the radio program. I'm Mark Wright. I'm here with Vincent Finelli and Jeff Olsen of Missouri Storm Shelters. We'll be right back.
Sobering but valuable information.
Oh, class, it's time to come meet your instructors. Face to face, up close, and personal. USA Prepares is coming to Ziggy's Cafe for our very first meetup this Friday evening from 5:30 to 7 p.m. Bring your appetite and find Ziggy's at the corner of Glenstone and Sunshine at the Lamplighter Inn in Springfield. Gentlemen, more details, please.
And there's the boss on USA Prepares, the radio program. I'm Mark Wright. I'm here with Vincent Finelli and Jeff Olsen of Missouri Storm Shelters. We're on USA Prepares, the radio program, KWTO 560 AM. And I love the boss talking about our meetup. And we are going to have a meetup this Friday from 5:30 to 7 at Ziggy's Cafe. And we invite all of you out there. We're going to have a lot of folks there from the Get Prepared Expo. And speaking of the Get Prepared Expo, Jeff was there. He was an instructor, seminar instructor in the spring edition, and it was very well attended, very well received. And I think Jeff is also going to be there with the fall edition, September 9th and 10th. He's a sponsor. I think we're going to have multiple seminars there. Vincent, I'm excited about Jeff being there in the fall.
Yeah, I am too. Jeff, can you just take a few seconds and tell our class what you're going to be talking about and who will be at the Get Prepared Expo relating to storm shelters?
Well, we're going to be talking primarily, or I'm going to be talking primarily about quality verification in the design and construction of storm shelters. And I'm actually going to be representing the National Storm Shelter Association. And one of the things that this is going to be primarily focused on is educating people on the way that they can determine whether or not a storm shelter has been properly designed and built. Because I'm telling you, there's a lot of homemade stuff out there, and it shocks me, to say the least, as to some of the things I see.
Well, you have on your website at MissouriStormShelters.com a YouTube video that shows the testing of your steel safe room where 2x4s are fired at it at high speed to see how well it withstands that test.
That's correct. Most people in tornadoes that are seriously injured or killed, unfortunately, those injuries or deaths are caused by flying debris. So the first consideration in a storm shelter being properly built and safe is whether or not it can withstand that flying debris, being hurled around by an EF5 tornado. Once that area of testing has passed, then the shelter blueprints and designs that are already presented with an engineer stamp are then given to the wind engineer specialists. These are scientists that specialize in nothing but wind engineering and the way that structures will react to strong winds. And those wind engineers take a look at how these shelters are designed and constructed and determine whether or not they're going to withstand an EF5 tornado. And it's quite an elaborate process. It's what it really boils down to. It's all about two things: science and engineering, and that's it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, class. If you go to usaprepares.com, there's a place where you can click, and you will see the link to MissouriStormShelters.com, and you'll be able to see this video. It's amazing. You need to see it, and it will give you some insight as to why you need to be concerned about what happens during storms. Mark and I were not in Joplin during the storm. However, we were there to see the aftermath, and we saw the result of these flying projectiles, which some of them were as large as cars.
Jeff, I know for a fact, I have a friend who described to me that they knew some friends and family that were in a storm shelter. A piece of debris actually penetrated the storm shelter, hit one of the inhabitants, and killed that person.
Really?
So, yes, that's a factual story. So, if you have storm shelters that, number one, are substandard, even though they may be built recently and they can't withstand an F5 tornado, you have issues. And then if you have a storm shelter built decades ago that may have done some degraded, I should say, you need to seriously consider maybe upgrading to a storm shelter.
Well,
like
I think
Missouri
so.
Storm shelters.
Well, thank you. I think that that's probably very true. These old style Wizard of Oz time storm shelters, of course, they all had wooden doors, and we know that's not going to work. But of course, just for the comfort of the occupants too. I mean, most of them are full of water. They have snakes and whatever else is living down there, and it's just. But it's all they had at the time, and at least they had a place that was somewhat safe. But yeah, I mean, upgrading would be not a bad idea. And really, my wife bought a new refrigerator the other day, and it's amazing. It's half the price of a storm shelter. So storm shelters are really not that expensive, and they're easily financed.
Well, let's talk about that. So, since this is a major purchase, how does one go about finding the funds for it? Are there funds available? What do we do if we want to buy a storm shelter?
Well, our company has a couple different programs available. We have a zero interest plan with payments for 12 months or 9.9% up to 48 months. Of course, this is with approved credit. However, I just found out today that the Postal Federal Credit Union has sent out letters to all its members that they will finance storm shelters at 2.9%.
So they're interested.
So that's great.
So they're interested in having their employees